You don't have one personality. Instead, we as humans move through different inner states. And most of the trouble we experience begins when we tend to forget that. Modern culture tells us that the opposite is true. We're encouraged to define ourselves clearly, quickly, and consistently. We're often asked to describe who we are in just a sentence by picking a label or a type or a tagline. Are you introverted or extroverted? Are you creative or analytical? Are you a leader or a campaigner? And it sounds useful, but most of us recognize that this description doesn't actually match the lived experience because lived experience doesn't correspond to the system. Most people don't feel like one fixed self for all eternity. They feel different across time. One week we're focused, the next we're scattered. In some situations we can be outgoing, in others we prefer to be withdrawn and secluded. And this insistence on a given personality type for everybody just creates dissonance in the mind. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? A better question might be to ask, what state am I in right now, in this present moment? In older traditions, especially in Taoist thought, human beings, they weren't understood as static, permanent, fixed identities. They were understood as processes, as a field of movement, as changing configurations of energy, attention, and intention operating harmoniously. With their energy, waxing, waning, gathering and dispersing like yin and yang in continuum. And through these processes, certain tendencies come to the fore, whilst others naturally recede. Things like habit and social conditioning, however, it can create these glitches whereby these tendencies start to stick, and rather than see them for what they are, we call them us, and we call that our personality. And the psyche reflects this very naturally. It doesn't speak in definitions, it speaks in images, moods, impulses, even bodily sensations. And I talk about this in my last video. These reflections make us feel either tight or expansive, alert or withdrawn, driven or contemplative. All of the range, the gamut of human emotion. But these aren't philosophical positions. They're all just internal weather moving through our system. When older systems mapped human experience, they weren't trying to define who you are. They were trying to define and to describe how inner states arise, how they change, how they pass. And their goal wasn't self-description, it was just orientation. But self-description and reductionism are the bête noires of modern society today, and so we find ourselves in a situation whereby none of these labels feel quite right. And this is because the psyche doesn't operate like a checklist. It operates through images, moods, impulses, and sensations. One minute you feel expansive, the next you feel contracted. One day you're heavy, the next you're restless. Sometimes you're alert, sometimes you're quiet. You don't decide these states or moods consciously. Most of the time, they just arise. And that's why imagination is so important. Not fantasy as such, but inner imagery, metaphor, a felt sense, making tangible and embodied something that is essentially formless. So when someone says something like, I feel stuck, they're not making a big philosophical claim. They're literally describing the terrain that they are on right now, and it's sticky. Modern psychology often tries to translate these experiences into categories, which can be useful, but it can also flatten something living into something static and reductive. Think about how different you are on different seasons of the year, different times of the year. Maybe in spring, people feel restless, full of ideas, eager to start something new. In summer, they might feel more expressive, more gregarious, more outward energy bubbling up to the surface. In autumn, maybe they're feeling more reflective, more selective. Maybe they're more serious in a way. And in winter, naturally, feeling quieter, conserving energy, and expressing only contained emotion. Most people accept these seasonal shifts in others without judging them at all, but when similar shifts happen internally within us, we start to panic. We start to label, we narrativize, we collude with the provocateur that is our mind to derail our inner peace. And we tell ourselves things like, I've lost motivation, I'm not feeling myself today, I just need to get back to who I really am. But what if this is who you really are, right now, today, and who you are tomorrow is a whole world away still? Seasonal intelligence, something Taoist systems understood very deeply, recognizes that different phases require different behaviors. Personality tests, well, they promise clarity, but really they offer just a snapshot. What type of person you are today how you're operating right now, what you're suited to this month. The issue isn't that they are useless as tools, it's that they offer quiet, temporary stability. But most people don't live just one life, they live several, often all at once. The person you are in your 20s is not the same person you are in midlife. Things like parenthood, loss, illness, responsibility, success and failures, all of these drive and reorganize the psyche to operate differently. Certain capacities come online, others fall dormant, just like a switchboard. And a test taken at one moment in your life, it can describe a state then and there, but it often gets mistaken for a permanent identity. What gets lost is the understanding that humans iterate. We organize in response to context. We adapt over and over across a lifetime. And that adaptation, it's not flat, but it's a fluid, moving intelligence. And we see the same problem in how we talk about generalists and specialists. Specialists are often described as if they are naturally suited to one narrow function. Generalists, on the other hand, considered to be scattered and unfocused. But really, this is just another oversimplification. In reality, people move between depth and breadth across time. A person may specialize deeply in one phase of life and then broaden later in another. Or maybe they explore widely at first and then consolidate. What looks like inconsistency from the outside is often just a response to changing demands. Instead of asking whether someone is a generalist or a specialist, a better question might be, what kind of engagement is being asked from me right now, and how do I go about doing it? Modern society, it struggles with complexity. Such a developed system is relevant in the age of speed, simplicity, and condensed branding. Multiplicity is an inconvenience. But internally, we humans are a web of pluralities. There are parts of us that initiate, parts of us that express, parts of us that stabilize, parts that refine, parts that withdraw, parts that rest, parts that contract. And when one aspect dominates inside of us for too long, when we mistake a temporary state for our entire identity, all sorts of problems naturally arise. Someone stuck in constant reflection will lose momentum. Someone who's always contained and restrained becomes irrelevant. Someone who speaks their mind too often, they're going to get into trouble. Balance isn't about choosing the right personality. It's about rotation, like the spoke of a wheel, bolstered by suspension and moving in accordance with the terrain that surrounds us. And this is where mapping becomes more useful than labeling. Instead of asking, who am I? We should be asking, where am I right now? And how do I operate from this space? Once you have the map, self-criticism becomes largely irrelevant because orientation is the primary focus. You're too preoccupied with that. So you don't have one personality, but you do have access to several states, many in fact. And wisdom lies in knowing when to inhabit each one. This is where we have to marginalize modern culture and just trust the older, wiser systems of thought as they pertain to seasons, cycle, and change within us. If this idea resonates, don't rush to define yourself anew, but just start to notice. Notice which version of you activates in any given moment, when you are leaning on or overusing a part of you too much, or when you're neglecting it entirely. Pay attention to the internal weather and watch as it moves and as the seasons shift around you. In the next video, I'll begin laying out a clearer map for this terrain, not as a belief or a prescriptive set of values, but as pattern recognition that we can use, each and every one of us, on an individual level. If this has landed with you, subscribing just means that you get to stay in this conversation. See you next time.